So Need for Scale. I'll just do a very brief intro of the company and why we feel we're good people to talk about this particular case. So we have, this number is actually outdated. We have almost 1.4 million 3D assets in our stock. We have thousands of 3D designers working on our B2B delivery platform. We have close to 5 million users registered on the CGTrader website. So, and we've been in business over 10 years, and we work with over 150 Fortune 500 customers. So we feel we're at the place where we can actually talk about true scale rather than just, let's say, boutique approach to asset creation, like Max mentioned. So in principle, the delivery process, whether it's at scale or it's small, the flow seems to be the same, more or less. Like you have to prepare, the customer needs to prepare the order, your designer have to prepare it, then there's a QA. When it's okay, then you go to the customer reviews the asset again. This is iterative process so to get the asset right, and then it's delivered, right? So this is pretty straightforward and it doesn't actually change that much. However, the approach how to achieve this flow and how to make it fast and how to make it scalable is totally different. So if you take a look at how small studios operate, right? How the small groups of individuals or small studios, like up to a couple dozen people, work is that you deliver a few hundred assets, maybe 1,000 assets a month. The clients come to you with different requirements and you sort of manually handle this, right? So like you see what your client wants and you try to deliver it, and that's it. You probably do some manual checking. There's probably no big automated pipeline. You probably don't work with too many technical artists. This is something that comes probably later. But then when you evolve to something bigger, let's say you're already somewhat established company, you have to deliver thousands of assets a month, and you still get different requirements. Maybe you have some freelance teams to work with, and you try to partially automate that, right? So this is like a next stage that a lot of companies are in. But jumping from this to the huge scale, this is the big leap forward, which requires a lot of changes in approach and technical wise, which I'll touch upon on my later slides. So if you have to work with multiple companies and they're not just like small clients, you're not only delivering like the main assets, like the hero assets that they want to present in their campaigns, but you actually have to digitalize everything that the company has. And imagine any furniture vendor or home appliances vendor. Those companies create thousands of assets per each category a year. So if you have at least, few, like 1, 2, 3, 5 clients like this, you already are dealing with thousands, tens of thousands assets monthly. And this is not something you can only achieve by multiplying the number of people that's working with you, because first of all, where do you get 10,000 people to work with you? And second of all, you have to manage much more. Sorry for the chewing. I'll mute myself for a second. Sorry again. Is it very disturbing or?
I think we can still understand you. Yeah.
Okay, so I'll just try to continue. Sorry. So changes I'm referring to, there are 4 main differences I would like to point to. So when you think of, let's say, agency approach to the project, you work on a single unit or batch approach, but you essentially, what you're working with is, like I mentioned, agency approach. So the client comes to you, you think of this particular client and nothing else. Like you don't think about the future, you don't think about other processes, you don't think about how this actually influence what you do as a company. You're just focused on delivering those assets for this particular client. cash out and be happy with it, right? However, if you want to do this with multiple companies and huge companies that have thousands of assets, you actually have to think of your company more as a factory rather than agency. So you're targeting to create an assembly line process that can suit most of the use cases. Of course, there are some special cases, and there are some, like I mentioned, hero products that need some personal touch. But for the most part, you want to be able to work like a factory. And in a factory, you don't consider every single asset or every 10 assets as a separate entity. You think of the scale. So you think of how to create one assembly line that can output as many possible deliverables in the given time frame, right? The next thing is approach to project management. So in terms of project management, again, if you're working as an agency, so you have 10 people, maybe you have 40 people in the company and you deliver per client basis, you have a project manager and they manage this particular project, again, without bigger picture. But if you want to move to scale and if you want to make your company future-proof, you have to start thinking about actually process management. So again, you no longer think about how this particular project will play out, how to handle those specific requirements. You rather think how to manage the process inside of the whole company so that it doesn't break your general direction as a whole entity, right? And this is understanding that has to be clear, not only for your engineering department, but also for people that sell what you have to offer, right? Or your key account managers or the marketing, so that the clients also understand this different approach. But you have to also present them with the benefit that comes with it, right? Because they might feel that, okay, I'm not treated individually anymore. But if you present them with the benefit of creating that many assets with lower cost, because this is more factory approach rather than a boutique one, then you can come to an understanding. And to achieve this from technical standpoint, you have to transition, or I suggest you transition from custom inputs to standardized inputs. And what I mean by that is, again, every customer comes to you with some requirements. And bear in mind, not all customers actually understand the industry we work with, right? For many customers, digitalization, 3D assets is something still new. And even though they probably heard about AR, 3D, maybe real-time even, they don't necessarily have people like you or us that are in the industry for over 10 years, that are specialists in this area. They don't necessarily understand what they need. They just read some articles and come to you. Of course, some bigger companies still have those 3D teams, but it's, again, nice to align with them on what they actually need and maybe sometimes explain to them that what they want is not necessarily what's best for them. And it should work to both their and your benefit. To their benefit, because you can explain to them, that some things might be approached in a different way, but also for you, it's very important that you don't have to deal with 100 different requirement sets that are presented in various ways. So you don't have to understand, you don't have to learn every time how to approach this particular case. You want to standardize it as much as possible, and this works both for your technical team for automation, but also for the designers that work with you. If you have to manage like 10,000 people that are creating 3D assets for you, and they create assets for different clients, not necessarily knowing who the client is, they don't want to switch context too much, right? They want to be working in the same flow all the time, even though they're working for different clients. So standardization is super important. And then, sorry, just take a sip. And custom outputs delivered by designers. So again, if you have 10,000 people, it's hard to expect that everybody will work in the same way, right? But you need to essentially guide your community of 3D artists so that without too much burden on them, they're able to prepare some standardized outputs that for you is easy to consume, to convert to different platforms, and so that you're able to automate this process rather than require them to prepare 15 different things for 15 different customers. And moving forward, the perfect case scenario, of course, would be that there's just one workflow, there's just one QA flow. So when the designers create those things, your QA team, both automated and then manual review, would look always the same. And there's some automation on top of it that outputs different deliverables. However, this, of course, is not the case, but we're trying to get there. We as a company, and I believe we as an industry, there's a lot of articles. Also, Kronos Group is putting out some guidelines to how to create assets for the benefit of all. So like they're easily consumable. They follow the same conventions, etc. Right? So I will start with the requirements, as this is something that's your basic input. So the client requirements, like I mentioned, they may come in various forms. Essentially, sometimes you can get even the PDF or a Google slide or Excel sheet or whatever. And you have to tackle this. You can't try to educate your clients, but this takes time. This is a process, and you have to deliver while doing this, right? It's not, you cannot stop your delivery for half a year just to explain every single client what would be the best way for them to deliver the information. You actually have to start delivering, and only then when they see the benefit, you can start trying to educate them. So what we do, we have, let's say, a workflow framework, which essentially translate any information that the client may have into some frame, into some points that are standardized, right? So of course there is an ID, there's a pipeline. So what needs to happen with this asset to get the results you need? There's a automation config, which is a very big structured JSON configuration that can be fed both to the automation tools and can also define the deliverables that the customer might need. Because again, bear in mind, there might be many of those. There are some platforms like proprietary platforms that the client might have. They also might want to use our viewer or your viewer, but there are also like public platforms, right? Like, let's say, Spark AR or now Omniverse, or there's a lot of different platforms out there that your client might want to have the assets prepared for. And you have to make it possible for them, right? So that being said, I will just touch on the main two workflows we have. I think this is probably something that's common to many companies. For now, we do distinguish the low poly workflow and the high poly workflow. So the low poly, what we defined in the low poly workflow, which we feel for now works best, is we have the FBX deliverable with PBR texture set. So this is a format that most artists are familiar with. This probably will evolve, this will change, especially since FBX doesn't actually support fully the PBR material texture set. So for now, we ask for delivery of this asset. Since any DCC can output it, it's straightforward, everybody understands it, plus the PBR texture set, and this is our one input. So our designers, when they work with whatever client they work for through our platform, they deliver the same thing. The requirements might vary a bit, for example, in terms of naming convention or the poly count budget or some other technical details, but essentially the output is the same. So they don't have to switch context too much. They only look at those, few variables that may change across the projects. But in essence, they create one thing. So they're not really confused. And out of this, we push it through the pipeline of automated processes. So we convert the FBX file to GLTF, because then you already can have hooked up the old textures. You have something that's consumable by essentially any device right now, and it's easy to convert further. It's we also do some FBX to FBX conversions, which sounds a bit funny, but yeah, with FBX SDK, we sometimes have to change some things. And again, this is to the benefit of designers, so they don't have to worry too much because we are able to convert what they do in an automated way so that the customer receives what they need in terms of this format. We also can, of course, like convert the FBX to other DCCs. But keeping in mind the main workflow and the scale, so the FBX to GLTF would be for us a like a main flow, and I actually suggest the same, especially in terms of assets like low poly assets or mid poly assets, essentially, or real-time ready assets, right? Regardless the poly count budget, to do this, because GLTF is very lightweight and it has all the textures hooked up. You don't have to worry about anything else anymore, and it's perfect real-time format, right? And out of this, you can validate the asset through the Cronus validator and then create some deliverables. And based on the configuration, you may output various configurations, various deliverables, right, for different platforms. So essentially, the benefit for you is that you generate a lot of outputs automatically, and the benefit for the client is they essentially pay for one model, and they can be presented with the assets for any platform they require, as long as it supports this format. Now, there are some challenges, like the multiple requirements and deliverables and targets, like I mentioned. And the issue here is the geometric growth. So again, if you work, because like if you have one client and they want 4 deliverables, imagine they have one set of requirements, and then you have another client with different set of requirements, and they also want 4 deliverables. With 2 clients, you already have 8 different outputs, right? So without automation and without standardization, you'll soon like be buried under those deliverables. And now for the high poly workflow, it's a bit simpler. We mainly rely on 3ds Max and Vray for now. We of course can support different platforms, but that was something that was most common for the designers that worked with offline rendering, that worked with ArcViz scenes, etc. Like this was the biggest part of the ecosystem was occupied with this workflow. So that's what we focused on. So of course there's some validation, and then you can produce multiple outputs, like you can produce renders, you can create 360 spinners that also many clients still like, and you can then put it into some embeddable viewer. This process of course can be also automated, and again, I suggest to automate as much as possible. But there's also another flow that we enabled quite recently, and it actually benefits from RapidCompact. So we have this flow of converting 3ds Max asset into the FBX file, then pushing it through the same pipeline I showed you in the low poly process. So we can convert this to GLTF, hook up all the PBR texture, make the asset look good, and then we can optimize the asset to make it more real-time friendly. And yeah, actually the geometry optimization is done with RapidCompact. So we can create low poly deliverable out of the high poly model, which is suitable for the real-time use. Now, I would like to share the tools ecosystem with you. Of course, there are various approaches, but for us, at least, the core, let's say the heart of the process management is AWS Deadline Pipeline. It's essentially a tool that you can extend, you can write plugins for it, you can hook up any process, any command line tool or DCC there, and it distributes your work across your render farm. It also is able to on demand attach AWS Fleet if you need more computing power ad hoc, essentially. So this is something that you might want to look into. There are also other platforms like this. There's Afanasi, I believe, it's open source. I'm not an advocate of AWS or Amazon. I just like, this is something that we use, probably some of you as well. If you're not using this, or if you're not using any management software, while hitting the scale, you will have to because there's only so much what you can do manually, right? So either this or Financier or any other processing software is definitely something worth looking into. And with this, we can trigger multiple things. We use Blender, 3ds Max, Maya, FBX, Decay, some other DCCs, RapidCompact mentioned for auto optimization, Pure and Image Magic for textures operation, and we have some proprietary software packages like QA Viewer we created with some interactive functionality. Our own digital asset manager that's available for the client. So this is, again, something that you want to look into. If you're a small company or a medium company, it's probably not worth investing in developing your own digital asset manager. There are some paid ones and there are some open source ones, I believe. But if you're moving to a really big volume and you want your clients to also be able to use it, maybe this is the time when you think it will be worth investing in developing actually your own digital asset manager that your customers would benefit from as well. We of course have some asset validation and some proprietary AI ML processes to aid the QA, the designers, and essentially any flow. So that's very brief touch on the tools ecosystem. Again, feel free to use whatever you prefer. This is something we find, at least for now, as a sort of optimal setup. And one maybe last note from my end is like what to do, because I mentioned a couple of times like there are different requirements and different workflows, different clients, and you have to sort of work with all of them. So, and you cannot expect everyone to adjust to you, right? Like, of course, the bigger you are, the bigger traction you have in the industry, the more you can try to, let's say, not force is a bad word, but like you may try to convince customers to conform to your requirements. But there are different clients, different needs, and different platforms. But we believe there is a way to address this issue. And this is by creating sort of like requirements configurator. So imagine you have a tool where you can input essentially any variable that might be relevant to a 3D asset. And you can put in those requirements there, and this will be converted into something that's consumable both by your automated pipeline, but also it would generate documentation for the designers, because again, this can be a big issue for the designers when they have to switch from an asset to an asset and they all have different requirements, right? So it might be confusing. Maybe there's no proper knowledge base, or if there's knowledge base, it's huge and it's hard to find the proper answer to your actual question. So it's important that people you work with have easy access to what do you require from them. And again, if you're a small studio, it's easy to, make a quick training for your 20 people and that's it, right? But if you're working with 10,000 people, then you have to make it system-based. So such a tool, this is something we want to look into. This is something we consider creating like an open source across industry effort, because it will benefit everyone. It will benefit the 3D vendors, it will benefit the clients. So yeah, that's the thing I wanted to mention, that this is something that we as an industry might want to try to address. And that being said, I would like to finish my presentation. So if there are any questions, please share them. I see there's something already on the chat. So let me stop sharing the screen and go through those.
Yeah, many thanks, Paweł, for the great presentation. And as you said, feel free to look maybe at the Q&A feature on Zoom, and then you can, I think, press that answer live button, and it allows us to go over the questions one by one. Okay. And everyone who has questions from the audience, now is also the time you can just enter them through the Q&A feature, and we'll then have them automatically added to this list. We'll be happy to discuss them. And same for the panelists. Actually, the panelists here may also ask them, like Ken and Eki, if you want to ask something via video, also feel free to do so. But maybe we start with the first ones that are in the chat already now, in the questions and answers. So yeah, Pavel,
yeah,
please go ahead.
I'm going to. Okay, so in the chat there's only. Okay, so we are in the Q&A. So answer live will. Okay, I'll click it. So what happens now? Sorry, I haven't used this feature before.
I think this just marks that you are answering it. I mean,
fair enough. Okay.
As long as we know which ones are answered, it's fine. Yeah. So
okay.
Should I read it, or do you want to read it?
You can moderate. Yeah, sure.
Okay, then let me just read here. This is a question from Federico. Can you reliably convert Vray to PBR metal, like material? Or metal roughness material, I suppose, even when transparencies are involved? And this is a mean question. Metal roughness, yeah, okay.
yeah, I assume so. Oh, actually, I think that there was something about the Vray, like the common Vray workflow that we would like to agree on as an industry, but I haven't like touched on it because I felt I was talking too much anyway. So it depends on the node setup, and yeah, this is something I had in the. So first I'll touch on in general, and then maybe we can go to transparencies. So yeah, as for the Vray to PBR metal, this is something metalness roughness. This is something that we're trying to address. I know many companies are trying to address, Max included. It depends on a set of texture of the nodes that you have in the material tree. So there are some nodes that are easily bakeable, and you can try to essentially zip it, quote unquote, to something that's consumable as a PBR texture set. There are some nodes, of course, like let's say fall off or some other nodes that depend on the camera position or angle that are not really conversion friendly. So what we try to do is we try to identify those groups of nodes that can be convertible and not. And that being, and with this, we're trying to create the requirements for the designers. If we see that you might want to have this asset converted then to something real-time ready, or in general, if you want to be more future-proof, then we try to stick to those groups that are actually convertible. In terms of transparencies, like I don't see the issue here. Like you can have the opacity value set, right? So, or is it about exactly the Max? Can you like help me out here, because I'm not sure I get the big issue here with the transparency. Actually,
yeah. Federico mentions new GLTF extensions like transmission or volume. And I mean, looking at like you made some really good points. Like both, we had the same issues, right? Looking at materials when you have something like maybe, I don't know, glass, frosted glass, things that actually have some volume, and then you can't really reproduce the ray traced appearance like perfectly in real time, right? You have to somehow fake it.
Yeah, so Federico, I'm not sure if I answered your question to the fullest. I hope I did. So yeah, in a nutshell, you are able, if you define what nodes you can have up front, like if you understand that you would like to do it in the end, then it's good to stay in some frames of what is easily convertible and whatnot.
Yeah, well, many thanks. Oh yeah, seems you answered it properly. So thanks for the interesting question, and many thanks also, Pavel, for answering. There's something new coming in the chat from Takuma Kokubo.
Wait, there's one more question in the Q&A.
There's one more in the QA right next. So let's take that one first. And yeah, again, like everyone, feel free to submit your questions through the Zoom Q&A feature, and then we'll handle them one by one. So these we have already answered. The next one is from an anonymous attendee saying, do you think FBX will still be viable as an exchange format? So FBX, we talked a lot about FBX now, right? Like carrying a more rich material standard as a basic PBR property, such as metallic roughness, etc. And yeah, so
there's more to the question.
Exactly, right. Saying specific DCC PBR material standards such as physical materials in 3ds Max already support more advanced PBR material properties such as clear coat, IOR, refraction. In that regard, what is your thought on USD plus a rich material standard such as Material X as an exchange and asset creation standard?
Okay, so the FBX question is kind of to Autodesk developers whether they want to improve this format or not, because if it remains the way it is, and given that the metalness roughness became almost like a golden standard for the real time, then I believe they have to evolve it to support this. That being said, like FBX is still a viable format. Like it's nice. However, if you take into account GLTF and USD, those two, like FBX is somewhere in the middle, I would say, because GLTF is really like real-time ready. You can do, it's consumable by anything. It's essentially a JPEG for 3D. And USD, on the other hand, can like really translate almost everything from one DCC to another. Like it provides really good interface amongst the DCCs. So it actually serves the purpose that FBX was meant to in the first place, I believe. But it went way further, right? So whether FBX remains a viable format, it's a bit, I guess, on Autodesk actually, because I feel it's threatened. I still feel it's a major part of the ecosystem because any application can understand it, any application can export it or import it, and it's just easy, right? And everybody's used to it, and 3D industry is not the faster adopter. Like 3D artists, I would say, are not the faster adopters of things. Like if you're used to some workflow for 10 years, you're likely to stick with it for some time unless you see really clear benefit. So for example, with USD, the benefit is there, but it's not really that easy. I mean, it's not yet that's supported in the industry, in the ecosystem. It's just something that's right now being talked about. It's something developed in Pixar, and it's not something that's supported everywhere right now, right? It's not an easy thing to create perfect USD from any DCC right now yet. So yeah, I think FBX life depends on Autodesk actually. What do they do with it? And in terms of the USD, I believe, yeah, USD is somewhat a future because it answers the desperate need that FBX tried to answer at some point, like 10 years ago, probably. So it provides the interface amongst the applications, which is great. I mean, like not an interface, but the format that can be used from different DCCs. And it also has a very cool feature of composability, right? So it's not just because like when you think of FBX file, you usually would think of assets, right? And USD has the easy way of combining few assets into one scene. So I think this is a big leap forward. And yeah, and in terms of Material X, yeah, this is of course a great exchange. Like this is very rich material standard. But again, it's not widely adopted yet. So if it becomes a golden standard, then great. For now, I don't think it's like super supported in the industry yet. But I believe both USD and Material X are the good, let's say, direction in the industry because they are supposed to democratize, right? The assets. So yeah, I hope this answers the question. Maybe Max, you want to add something to it?
Well, I can certainly feel your pain. FBX is still very popular, right? And it's for us, it's a problem that it's not open sometimes.
Oh yeah, of course.
Basically, reverse engineering a format. But yeah, that was a really like interesting answer, and I hope like that the attendee's question is answered with that. So some thoughts on USD and Material X. And then we have a question from Takuma Kokobu, which is like specifically about a CGTrader offering, right, called Arsenal. So it says, from a user standpoint, it sounds like we get access to a talent base of modelers through Arsenal. Is pricing fixed / moderated within as well?
Yeah, so the way the Arsenal works, so like the delivery for businesses is that you don't have to deal with designers like directly. You just come to us as a company. You say you have either 100 or 1,000 or 10,000, whatever. You have some number of assets. These are the requirements you would like those assets to meet, and we distribute it across the base. I believe the pricing is done. There's a scale. I'm not really on the sales team. I'm the technical lead, but I believe there's a scale. I think 1 to 10 complexity, and based on this, every asset is evaluated in terms of price. But this is something that would have to be. I mean, this is the way it works. I don't remember whether it's 10 scale or 1 to 7 scale, but I know there's a scale, and based on that, each asset is priced. But you don't have to worry. That's the, I would say, beauty of it. You don't have to worry, that you have 10,000 assets, so 100 people deliver them, and you have to deal with each of one of those people. You only get the assets in the QA viewer that you can, manipulate. You can create some points with some feedback that you don't like this or that. So first of all, everything is automatically checked, so the assets are technically correct. Then there's QA done internally, so we make sure that the asset looks exactly like the references you provided, and only then, when we believe the asset's fine, you just receive the ready asset. If you have anything else to touch, maybe we missed something, but it doesn't happen too often. But yeah, you can still QA the assets with our tools to make sure you get what you wanted, right? So yeah, I hope this answers the question.
Right. Yeah, sounds great. Thank you is the answer. So sounds like it was answered. Thanks. And then I think we still have a few minutes for more questions before moving on to next talk. We can also maybe do like a 3 minutes break in between so that everyone can grab a coffee or go around the corner and come back. I would have one more question. Also touching the point you just mentioned, which is like super fascinating, like how you deal with all these studios that are then have your client like getting in the end, let's say 10,000 assets per month, and one studio handles, you had the number like 600 maybe in a month or so, and then you, let's say if I'm a retailer and I come to you to CGTrader and I ask you, I have this batch of 10,000 assets that I need to be created within the next 12 weeks or so, or whatever is realistic. Do you also use the some kind of scale, like the model complexity you just mentioned, to assign jobs to the studios? Or maybe do you have a notion of the throughput that the studio has and how many jobs they're currently working on, something like load balancing in more technical terms?
Oh, but I mean, when we distribute we mainly, I believe we have some like bigger studios that are already like a conglomerate of artists, but our basic flow relies on artists, like the separate artists. So wait, sorry, I try to, let me just think a second, because I lost the train of thought. Yeah, so we have the complexity scale, and we have like the, let's say, we do rate our designers. Like, so if you're a designer working with us, we know how much capabilities you have. Like, there is a limit on how many model requests and a designer can have at the given time, like in parallel, and it's a very small number. So we do know our capacity as a whole, and we also like do have the understanding of which designers are capable of what in terms of complexity. It's not like everyone can take anything, right? Like when you work with our platform, you get scored essentially by the assets you deliver, and with the given score, you get access to more complex assets. So with this, we first of all we assure that you're not overloaded, but we also assure that the client will get designer of the required skill set. Like imagine if you have like a very simple table, you don't need a pro with 10-year experience to do this, right? But if you're working on some very complex model, I don't know, like open fridge or whatever, something that is complex, you want to be sure that this job will be taken by someone with proper experience. So we distribute those jobs to people that we know will be able to handle this. And we do know like how many of those are working on what. So like we do have this data to understand what's our capacity at the given point in time. I hope this answers. Like I know that you asked about studios, but I know we do work with some studios as well, but I don't know the actual flow there. I know how it works with the separate designers, but I assume it works still somewhat the same way, because even if it's studio, let's say there's 30 designers, there's still 30 guys or girls, like people, and they still have some capacity. They are still rated with a score in terms of what can they work on. So I don't think there's a much difference.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, without having thought about it like a lot, certainly not as long as you, it still feels to me like handling maybe all these different artists individually is even more challenging than handling a small number of studios. So like it seems you have solved a big challenge there.
Yeah, this is definitely a big challenge, and this is why I mentioned the automation and the like standardization, because if you're a studio, that's what the beginning of the presentation was about. Like if you're a studio and you handle some like limited number of assets, and then you work, even if you work with 50 people, it's still manageable. But to be able to deliver that many assets in parallel, there's no way you can have a company of 10,000 3D artists, right? So you have to have not just the freelance contractors, you need to have a huge community. And for this, you need to standardize essentially everything and automate everything, because otherwise there's no way you can manage it. And that's why I mentioned like this transition from project management, where you can say, okay, I have this 500 assets, I drop those 10 guys on this, and I manage the project. Now you have to manage the process so that anyone that plugs into this process is able to work with it and then plug out and like deliver whatever you need, right? And this is when you can deliver 1,000 assets, but you can do it with 10K as well, because you just plug in more people to the same system, and you don't need to manage those people, you just manage the system, right? So
right. Well, super interesting. Many thanks for answering the questions, and thanks for your presentation, Paweł.